Good evening, one and all. So good to have you here. I'm Kevin Rothwell from Beach Radio and Vernon Matters, and I would like to acknowledge that we are located on the traditional and unceded territory of Syilx and Okanagan peoples. Thank you to the Emily Dahl Foundation for the invitation to be here this evening. I know it's going to be amazing. We have a full schedule, and hopefully you'll get an opportunity as well to talk to Paul one-on-one. He's no stranger to this area, as we discovered in a short conversation this afternoon. So good to have him here. And right now it is a real pleasure to introduce driving force behind the foundation, the co-founder, and a dear friend, and Emily's dad, Mr. Sherman Dahl.
Well, you want me to come? Yeah, sure. All right. Thanks, Kevin.
There's no way I'm coming up here alone, Paul.
That's what we should do, right?
That's what we should do. You didn't bring the coffee?
No, I don't drink that thing, that coffee stuff.
Am I on? You're okay, guys?
I'm a real Canadian.
So what a wonderful opportunity to be together tonight. So I'm going to try do 2 or 3 things over the next, hopefully 5, 6, 7 minutes. Number one is just introduce a little bit about some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight. Secondly, talk very briefly about the Emily Dahl Foundation, which really is linked to the purpose of our life, which is to be happy. Then the third thing is to talk a little bit about something that I guess would call the truth seekers. And one of them is sitting right beside me. And the other speaker that's going to speak tonight is a very interesting gentleman by the name of Ted Olson. And so Ted and I are going to say a lot less than Paul. Paul is our keynote speaker tonight. So first of all, I guess I just really want to thank everybody for being here. Not only here with us in the Coldstream in Vernon, but also virtually. We have many people, I'm not sure exactly how many, but that have joined us almost from around North America, and there might even be some from Europe. So thank everyone for being here for this fireside chat. So now you can see there is a fire. And certainly, I wouldn't be here today probably talking to you if it wasn't for my incredible wife, Katie. Not to mention all of our other friends and family that are with us here today, and some of us that aren't here today. None of this would be possible without the support of all our friends and family. We were sitting on the patio, I think last night or a couple nights ago, a little bit of a blur, and she said, "Well, what are you going to do for a fireplace?" I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, it says it's a fireside chat." I said, "Well," and Katie's got a way of doing this to me like at 11 o'clock at night when it's a little bit harder to think. And I said, "Well, I don't think it really matters, Katie. Like it's just something that you say." She said, "Sure." And she pulled out Paul's book. She said, "The truth of your being must match the truth of your..."
The way of your being.
The way of your being must match
the truth of your being. Yeah.
She didn't really say that.
I'm not that good.
So, certainly...
You did say you had to have a fire, though.
Yeah. So certainly being together today is a real treat, and a little bit of a story. This symbol that we have for the foundation is the eternal knot, and it's the intertwining of wisdom and compassion. Wisdom being the true sense of the way things are, and you really get when you really have the truth of the way things are and the interconnectedness of us all in this being, is you tend to develop more compassion for things that are in your life. And I was at a really close friends of mine just the other day, and she's kind of a special gal to me, and she had remembered my birthday, and she gave me a real nice ceramic tile of the Eternal Knot, even though my birthday was on May 16th. And she gave me this card that came with it. Look at little Frankie.
I think he should be Churchill.
Yeah, he should be Churchill. And it was just, really special of her to, number one, it's always nice to get a gift. And I didn't really read the card till I got home. And, we've become close over a number of years, but it's in particular the last couple of years. She also lost a daughter, and it's been really important to me to be with her and talking about our losses. And a lot of times we haven't had deep conversations about it, but she's always been in the room and listening to me. And so anyway, she said, "Dear Sherm, birthday thanks and birthday wishes and super thanks. It's for being in our lives." And I didn't read that till when I got home, and it's just so important how we all, we all rely on each other, and especially when there's challenges. And it turns out that same lady actually had given me a book. Oops. Had given me a book from a Himalayan book, and inside of the book were all these eternal knots. And that's between this one that I got in Spain and getting that book, that's why we decided to make it the symbol of the Emily Dahl Foundation. So just wanted to share that story with you. So in terms of the Emily Dahl Foundation, I thought I would share, and I'm going to take a little page out of Paul's book, and I don't know if anybody's has watched Paul's program called Restoring the Shack. I was telling Lisa earlier that I think there's 21 or 22.
There's 20 actually produced, but there was 23 to begin with.
Is my mic okay, guys? Yeah.
Mine just
Sorry.
works better than yours.
22, 23, you said?
There's 20 produced, so
20
that's
produced.
yeah.
And they're actually phenomenal. And he told me last night at dinner, I did them all without a script.
I do everything without a script.
He obviously does everything without a script.
Ask
So-
him.
I thought I would share, this is one of the sort of first little booklets that we came up with for the Emily Dahl Foundation. We didn't sell 22 million copies. I can barely get anybody to like me on Facebook, but I thought it, and so when Paul's going through on Restoring the Shack, he always has his book with him, and he'll read parts of it and talk about it. So I highly recommend Restoring the Shack. It's on YouTube. But this is what I had wrote down. This booklet was put together with thoughts and readings that started in October 2018 on a trip to Thailand. Over the following months, many hours were spent thinking about the purpose of life and true happiness. Many of the teachings and philosophies that attempt to answer these questions are based on understanding your thoughts and your mind. As the back of this booklet says, happiness is an inside job. These are not new concepts, but are often not adhered to as we live our daily lives. It's time to change that. And in one of Paul's lectures, I'm not sure if he uses the word revolution, but it's, I know Paul senses a change that is happening around the world. It is time for a revolution. It's time for the youth of today to consider themselves as brothers and sisters. The century is young and so much can be done to promote happiness. The purpose of life is to be happy. From the moment of birth, every human being wants happiness and does not want to suffer. Neither social conditioning, education, nor ideology affect this. From the very core of our being, we desire contentment. One does not know whether or not the universe, its countless galaxies, stars, and planets, has a deeper meaning, but it is clear that we live on this earth, that those of us that live on this earth face the task of making a happy life for ourselves. Therefore, it's essential to discover what will bring about the greatest degree of happiness. And so, related to that, clearly, when you lose someone that's, very close to you, you have an overwhelming sense of fulfilling the wishes of the person that's passed away. And that really is the essence of the Emily Dahl Foundation is to promote happiness and compassion, which is what Emily was all about. And it's certainly something that would be fulfilling her wishes. So, that's a little bit about the Emily Dahl Foundation. And I guess the third thing I wanted to talk about was a little bit about Ted and also Paul. And again, I bring up this notion of the seekers of truth. And really, if we look back at some of the most enlightened people, whether it's the Buddha or whether it's Jesus, or there's many people that have come before all of us, and I think we all have that seed of enlightenment, in us. But one of the things is that they tend to be relatively uncompromising. In other words, they only speak the truth, and they don't really concern themselves whether or not you understand it, because what they care about is the truth. And that's I think what you're going to find today with Ted and Paul is that they understand the truth, therefore they seek it. So that's what they're here on earth to help others. And through their experience, I think you're in for a real special treat tonight, to be able to listen to Ted Olson and then to have Paul as our keynote speaker. And it's interesting with the truth of the way things are, is that it's hard to take the truth and bring it down to the human being level, because it tends to get adapted and sort of compromised, if you will. So the human being almost needs to seek the truth. And I think that's where Paul will, it says very eloquently, is when the truth of your
Wholeness is when the way of your being is an expression of the truth of your being.
And that's really a powerful statement. So you need to understand what the truth is, which is the wisdom of the way things are. And then you need to live your life in a way that you live that truth. But I'm not going to try and speak for Paul, that's for sure. So it's, we have that special treat tonight of being able to have as our speakers Ted Olson and Paul. And I guess the last thing is sort of something I've just asked everybody to share with me tonight, and it's, again, I take a bit of a page out of Paul's book. It's I don't know if everybody here saw the Mr. Rogers movie. It's a Beautiful Neighborhood. Paul's probably seen it. And how many people have seen that movie? Mr. Rogers. Yeah, I think it's just
Either one.
The one with Tom Hanks. And it was an amazing scene where, and I would ask you just to, do this along with me tonight, myself and Paul, and is to take a minute of silence tonight and just think of all the people that have loved you into the being that you are today. And it could be people that are here with you tonight. It could be people that aren't here tonight, and they might be friends in another city. And there might be people like some of our sons and daughters and parents and loved ones that are no longer here, maybe in heaven. And just take 1 minute to think about them and the people that have got you to where you are today. Then you can just imagine how grateful they are that you're thinking about them. Thank you for doing that with me. And with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, which is Mr. Ted Olson. You know, Ted's an amazing individual that, you know, I guess I'll maybe describe a little bit about Ted before I describe how I met him. You know, Ted's just about 83, if not pretty close to 82, 83. And Ted moved here from Germany when he was 18 years old.
That should be a warning to you all.
Yeah, please turn your phones off.
For those of you who didn't hear, a phone went off.
And it was the MC of all
I
people.
love that. It wasn't mine. That's what I love about it.
So Ted came to Canada when he was 18 years old, and when he was 22, he was working in Esterhazy, and he was shot in a hunting accident and lost his eyesight. And Ted always had a dream to have hunting and fishing lodges in northern Saskatchewan, and he was undeterred and decided that that's exactly what he was going to do. And even the CNIB at the time said that, Ted, that's not possible. And of course, Ted snapped back, well, if Henry Ford wouldn't have built the Ford, nobody would be driving one. And so Ted went on to become a very successful operator in northern Saskatchewan. And I met him when I was on a business trip in northern Saskatchewan, and someone was telling me and describing Ted and that he was blind and then he had done all these amazing things. And then I started seeing some of his beautiful carvings, which are behind us. And, you know, I kind of cold called him and went and saw him in Flin Flon because I was close enough. It took me about an extra 5 hours to get there, and Ted opened his door for me and has really helped me understand some wonderful things about life and happiness, and we all have tribulations. And so I asked Ted to spend 10 minutes with us and sharing some of his experience. And with that, can we turn it over to Ted?
Good evening, Sherman, and all your friends, and hello, Paul. I'm sure we will meet somewhere again. First of all, I'd like to greet all of you from the beautiful border of Manitoba and Saskatchewan. I am sitting here surrounded by the Great Canadian Boreal Forest, and I can tell you that you are tonight talking to a very happy man. I woke up this morning, I looked, so to say, in the mirror, and it was a gorgeous morning, and it's been a gorgeous day, and the sun is going to set in a few hours, and I've heard the loons this afternoon, and I come back to the same question, Sherman, as you well know, who paid for all this beauty? And then I went to Walmart, put $100 down and said, I would like $100 worth of happiness, which they couldn't give me. So I took a walk in the boreal forest and I got $1 million worth of happiness, which I didn't even have to pay for. So with that, I greet you and all your friends in BC, and I'm looking forward to this evening and to Paul's presentation. And I don't know, Sherman, we met several times, whether you have anything in particular you would like to know, or you think the audience should know. So what do you think?
Right back to me, I guess. You know, maybe I guess, Ted, I'll just give a quick intro to one of the first things that Ted showed me is when I first met him, he gave me this beautiful carving, and he had run from his workshop in Flin Flon at the back of his house where we were in the workshop, and I don't know how he did it so fast with these rickety steps that he had to negotiate, and he went and got this beautiful little carving, which is the limestone of the boreal for the seabed, 2 billion years old, and the beautiful wood and this little bird. And he said, Sherm, you put that candle in and you light that, and every time you light that, you'll know that more than one person's thinking about Emily. So maybe just describe why you did that, Ted.
Well, I think that the only way to go is to be positive in life, and I think that simply means to be happy. And even though at the age of 22, I well remember when I woke up in a hospital and the doctor told me that I would never see again. Obviously, that is a message nobody wants to hear at any time. However, if you really love the surroundings and you love life, and then I'm a great believer that you can overcome each hurdle. And with that attitude, and I may add with many backings of my friend, because no train will move until the locomotive starts pulling it. And I like to think we all have to be our own locomotive to move forward. And so without eyesight, I felt I was just as capable to do things in life, because whatever you want to do surely comes from inside of you. The most important things in life you cannot buy, they are already inside of you. And if you want happiness, then you go inside of yourself. That's where you will find it. That's where you will find the positive section of you. And the happier you are, the happier you make the people around you, and the happier the whole world comes surrounding you. And I wanted to do these things that I did, and I'm proud to tell you that I became Canada's first blind outfitter. I also became Canada's first blind mercury outboard mechanic. I was thinking of becoming a politician, but we got too many blind ones already, so I stayed out of that field. But I learned everything I know today. I've learned from my friends who lived in the boreal forest. I learned 3/4 of the things that I know today. I learned from others, and everything is achievable if you so desire to do that. So again, there is no sense going to somebody else or asking somebody else. If you have a mirror in your house, you look at it every morning, and that's where you will find all the happiness, all the willpower, all the good things that you want for that day, you will find in that person that's looking back at you in the mirror. And carving became a byproduct. But I don't know, Sherman, we talked about it a lot, that you don't buy, you cannot buy happiness because it's already inside of you. And I've said this many a times, when you in the evening sit and look at the sunset, ask yourself, who paid for that beautiful sunshine today. In the evening, when you see the moon and the stars, ask yourself, who's paying for that? And when you hear the call of the loon, and when you see the bears with their cups, and when you see the wildlife all the way around us, ask yourself, who paid for that? And if you find the person that paid for that, I'd be the first one to ask you who it is, because I don't think I will ever get a call from you with that answer. And so, in closing, I am looking forward to your festivity in Vernon. I hope someday to come out there and visit and meet many of your friends. And with that, I say so long from the beautiful Canadian forest in Flin Flon and Saskatchewan.
You got me there now. Thank you. And it's a pleasure now to introduce our next presentation. If we could have Lisa Whippich-Tobin, a family friend and counselor of the Dahls.
Hi.
Hi.
Introducing you with my back to you. That's nice, isn't
You
it?
can go up on the stage.
Oh, great.
Don't
That's
fall
what I
in the
want.
fire.
Oh, I'll sit down then. That's even better.
Please do.
Okay. Hi. I would like to thank Sherman for his impetuous enthusiasm that made this night possible. Sherman, a Buddhist, and myself, a Christian, which could be the start of a joke, often have discussions about religion and God. In one conversation, Sherman mentioned I should watch the movie The Two Popes, which I did and I loved. I asked him if he had ever watched The Shack, a favorite of mine. He hadn't. The next thing I knew, in true Sherman fashion, he had watched it, loved it, called the author, and booked him to come to Vernon to talk. He then let me know I was to do the introduction. So thank you, Sherman, for the honor of allowing me to introduce Mr. Young.
Thank you.
Whether or not you agree with all of W.M. Paul Young's theological views or not, which, as I have discerned through his interviews, he welcomes these dissenting voices and the dialogue that ensues. You cannot deny the fact that this man is a man who fully embraces a God of love, grace, and redemption. It is this that I have appreciated in all three of his novels, which I finished the Eve
Oh
this
my
morning,
gosh,
so
you
that was
did?
exciting. Yes, I didn't know about it, so I just found out about it, so I was very excited.
So,
Anyway,
which of the three do you like the best?
yes.
Great answer.
So The
Me too.
Shack, I have to say I have a spiritual crush on C.S. Lewis, so that was special. But The Shack, Crossroads, which has C.S. Lewis in it, and Eve, as well as his willingness to poke the bear through taking a fresh look at God while staying firmly rooted in the Bible. A Canadian now living in the States, we love to claim our own.
Absolutely.
Mr. Young has, as he calls it, a bit of an unusual childhood and went on to a life fully lived, of which has informed his work in the most positive of ways. W.M. Paul Young has a BA in religion from Warner Pacific College in Portland, Oregon. All three of his novels have been on the New York Times bestseller list, and as mentioned, The Shack has been made into a major motion picture. His most recent publication in 2017 is a nonfiction book titled The Lies We Believe About God, which I'm going to get to next.
Oh, sweet.
I am looking forward to a lovely discussion tonight, one that will invigorate thought, and I'm sure will be imbued with kindness and grace. So please join me in welcoming our guest speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Wow, I'm almost too tall for this. That's an unusual thing for me. So the WM is for William. I'm I'm one of 4 generations of Williams, none of who go by William. We all go by our middle names. So my dad is William Henry. He lives in town. My son is William Chad, Seattle, and his son, a firstborn of a firstborn of a firstborn, is William Gavin. And so I've decided to just stick with Paul Young for all future work because it was very confusing internationally. They couldn't figure out what in the world this WM was. And I'm not Mr. Young, that's my dad. So no worries, no worries. Okay, a couple things from what Sherman said, and also Ted. So if Ted is watching, which he's not, but he's listening, then I don't want to take anyone to task. It's just that words are really significant to me. And part of the reason for that is that I needed them in order to shade the truth, to lie, right? Because lying is a survival skill for a lot of us. It's not really an attempt to deceive anybody. It's really an attempt to find a way to be safe. And so it was one of my major defense mechanisms. But words have always been important to me. And the only thing that I would switch because of the word itself is I'd go from happiness to joy. I'd make the distinction in terms of joy. And part of it is the reason is this. Happiness is an old English word. It comes from hap, where we get happenstance. And the word itself means luck. So if you're happy, you're lucky. And if you're unhappy, you weren't lucky. So it's all externally based. Happiness is a concept that it comes from the outside in. Joy is irrelevant in terms of circumstance. So joy is not circumstance dependent, and it always comes from the inside out. I'm unapologetic about loving Jesus. I'm a little apologetic about religion that has purported to speak on the behalf of Jesus, which is what I grew up in. I'm a missionary kid. My sister is here. She's a missionary kid. We grew up in the highlands of New Guinea. That's part of our unusual childhood. We've both known loss, and I love that I was invited to talk about this kind of arena. And I'm grateful for all those who are out there in terms of virtual reality. Technology, that little thing with Ted was just remarkable to me. I thought we were going to see a video, and to have him actually with us. Oh, hi, Cricket, by the way. That's my niece Tara's friend who's watching from somewhere. And Tara's here. We know loss, and if you're around in this life long enough, you will know loss. It's part of the fabric of reality. And if you're depending on living a life that is separated from suffering, it's not going to happen. Every one of us doesn't have certainty, even about tomorrow. I could have some cell in my brain go sideways, and it's this part of my existence is done. And this is why one of the big things I talk about a lot is learning how to live in just inside the grace of one day, today. As far as I can tell, today is where eternity exists. That we're designed to live inside just today. Everything else is imagination. Sherman was kind enough to say I'm a truth seeker. Frankly, I ran away from it as hard as I could because it's a painful process to deal with, to work the truth into yourself or to find it in yourself. It's not easy. It's like, in fact, I was listening to a Jordan Peterson. They call it an inspirational motivation, which was, for me, an oxymoron for Jordan. But he talked about the dead wood in our lives being burned away. And that's the false self that so many of us have adapted to because we don't know how to find something that is actually true inside of ourselves. And so we let the external world tell us who we are. It might be trauma that tells us who we are. It might be a very angry father who tells us who we are. It might be social media who tells us who we are, but we're told who we are from the outside in. And this is about finding out the truth of who we are. That's where that line comes from. Wholeness is when the way of your being, how you live your life, is an actual expression of the truth of your being. There's a verse in the New Testament, in the scriptures, that says, as a person thinks in their heart, so are they. Now, what it's trying to say is, as a person thinks about the truth of their being, what do you believe is at the core of who you are? You'll become that in the way of your being. You will act what you believe. If you think you're a piece of crap, you'll act like a piece of crap, and you'll let people treat you like a piece of crap. Because that's what you believe. As you believe about the truth of your being, so becomes the way of your being. That truth of being, the word for it is ontology. Ontos is the word being in the Greek, and logos is the word to study or the words about. So ontology. So what is the truth of our being? That's a great question. And what do I believe that it is? And then how does suffering relate to that? How does loss bring some of that to the surface? Which it does. It faces you with issues of mortality. It faces you with issues of love. And all of us will experience it. I have. My family has. My sister has. My niece has. Right here in Vernon. And we have a history here, right? But Tara's 5-year-old daughter, her firstborn, died in a tragic loss the day after her 5th birthday. Debbie and I's brother was 18, was killed in a horrific accident down in Vancouver, right? I grew up in a culture that I thought was my own until I was sent to boarding school, but inside that culture, sexual abuse started for me at 5. That's why there's a character in The Shack who's a 5-year-old, a little girl who is lost, who suffers something horrific, right? And then I was sent to boarding school, and it continued in a Christian boarding school overseas. And it placed some things deeply in what I believed to be about myself. And frankly, a lot of my theology didn't help. It reinforced it, didn't help it. And it took me a long time to work it out, to really love the truth, you know. And it took me really until I was 50 years old. I was asked, so what was the reason that's, because I had mentioned that I had 11 years inside this conversation tonight, that I had had 11 years of dismantling what I believed about myself, about God, about life. 11 years of dismantling and rebuilding. And I was asked, what prompted you to even do that? And I said, I got caught by Kim, my wife, in a 3-month affair with one of her best friends. That's what started it, because at that point, I either had to keep running and creating different personas for different audiences, or I had to ask somebody for help. And at that point, suicide was a very real companion. Had always been, as for me, as the last way to run away, as the ultimate way to run away before I had to deal with the realities in my life. And that started, I had to make a choice to either face Kim or don't take the chance of hurting people the way I had. And I did. I blew up our world. And I didn't even know how I made the choice. It wasn't because of something in me, but for some of us, man, it takes desperation to get to the place where we're willing to ask the questions and to ask for help. I'd always stayed an isolated person. And thankfully, I married the wrath of God, you know. I used to be afraid of the wrath of God, or that God was a consuming fire, but I'm not anymore. Because that fire's intensity is not aimed at me. It's aimed at anything in my life that doesn't allow for relational intimacy. Anything in my life that is not true and real, that inhibits me from experiencing what it means to be fully human and fully alive. And that's what started an 11-year journey to try to ask the questions, why am I so screwed up? Why can't I take the risk of relationship? And 11 years later, because it took him and I 11 years to heal, and that means forgiveness is one thing. Forgiveness is for the sake of the victim. And she couldn't continue to live holding on to the poison of what I'd done. And so forgiveness is for the victim to let go, right? So that they can start to live. Reconciliation is the rebuilding of trust. And that's a lot of work. And if it happens, it's a miracle. And 11 years later, Kim trusted me again. And I could go into I almost killed myself about 4 months into the process of therapy because it was so hard. And thankfully, the therapist that I picked out of the yellow pages randomly turned out to be the exact right person for me. And he had warned me the day that I walked in and I said, here's my situation, and I outlined it. And I said to him, frankly, I don't want somebody to just tell me or ask me how I feel about this. I want to know that you can get me from A to Z. And he said, I can, but it's going to take 1.5 years. I said, I'm in. He said, everybody's sitting where you are. They always say they're in. But after a couple months, you'll feel a little better about yourself, and you'll feel a little bit more in control, and you'll bail out right before the really hard stuff. And about 4 months into it, I hit the really hard stuff. And I gave up, frankly. It was too hard. And I started planning a trip to Mexico City because I thought maybe the only good thing I can do in my life is to kill myself far enough away that my kids won't find my body. Right? And I was planning this. And 2 friends showed up, unbeknownst to each other, and one sat down one night and talked to Kim. And that's Kenny. And Kenny's a broken boy, like me, except he didn't hide it. You know, he grew up in a horrific environment. And he comes to talk to Kim and he says, I'm not here to tell you that you need to feel better about this. But he says, you know, I think right now Paul is doing the best he knows how, and I think if you hit him one more time right now, you're going to kill him. And Kim didn't know, of course she didn't know, and I hadn't even talked to my therapist about it. I'd closed up again. And so Kim didn't know the state I was in that moment. And she backed off a little bit, enough. And into it walked Kitty, a friend of ours, and she sits down with me and she says, Paul, where are you right now? And I said, I'll tell you where I am right now. I said, it's like Kim has been pounding me on the chest I started about 1 mile away from this cliff. And every day she just pounds on me. Kim's from, she was born in Minot, North Dakota, where there's no 50 shades of nothing, right? It's like this or that. And she is she and her 5 sisters are called the Force. And may the Force be with you, yep. So I said, Kim's pounding me to the edge of my cliff and then spun me around and she says, just look at it. And I'm looking into the abyss and I'm thinking like, what am I supposed to do? And I lost all my hope. It's the worst moment in my entire life. I'm looking down there and I'm going like, I don't know if there's one thing about me that's actually real. I don't know. I don't know if anything's not a survival skill or a defense mechanism. And I told Kitty, I said, you know all I am? I'm just this little pile of dried up shit that's on the edge of this abyss. And the wind is blowing, and I'm terrified that when it's done, there won't be anything left. And Kitty says to me, Paul, in that pile there's a seed. And I'm thinking, a seed? Really? And then I think, you know, if there was a seed in there, something could grow. I don't know what it is, but something could grow. And then I think, you know, seeds, they're supposed to grow good in this kind of stuff, yeah? And all my hope came back in a little tiny seed. And I didn't go to Mexico City. I went back to my therapist. And I told him what had happened. And we went back to work. And 9 months later, he said, Paul, you're done. And I went, what do you mean I'm done? He said, it might not be ethical or professional, but we talk about you. And amongst our psychiatrists and psychologists. And he said, we've never seen anybody work this hard and stick to it. And that's because it was life or death for me. I was desperate. And I worked hard. And my therapist and I became friends. And over the years, he'd check on me, but I began to make changes. Right? I didn't hide anymore. One thing, we never made my adultery the new secret. Not from day one. And the first person I had to tell and talk to, other than Kim, had to go to our house where her dad lived. Our house. He lived with us for 17 years. And I had to go tell this man what I'd done. And frankly, I wanted him to beat the hell out of me. Because I have a defense mechanism for that. But I don't have any for kindness. I don't have any for love. But I saw me break his heart. And he never raised a voice against me. He never raised a fist against me. Over the next years, his name is Willard. We called him Willie. The Willie in the shack is Kim's dad. Mackenzie's friend. And I began to make changes. I let men into my life, and most of my damage had come from men. And I began to let them into my life, and I worked. And Kim, you know, every time I'd talk to the therapist, I'd tell her what I was working on, and every time she said the same thing. Yeah, right, whatever. And I thought, boy, she's never going to believe anything that actually changes. And I thought, why should she? Why would she take the risk of trusting change when that's all I've been? I built the shack. The shack is the house on the inside that people had helped me build, and I didn't get good help. And I built a facade outside the shack because I kept all my addictions in the shack. That's the house in myself. But the facade I could paint as fast as I could pick up people's expectations. And I became a different thing to every different person, depending on the audience. And I didn't want to live that way anymore. So I didn't have any secrets. I told Kim the first day when she had already taken apart my office, right? And I walk in and she lets me have it for about 4 hours. I couldn't even look off the ground. That's what shame does. If you can't isolate, you'll go to the ground because you can try to shut everybody out. It's a safer place. And I said, Kim, if we're going to do this, I have to tell you every secret I have. Because secrets have been killing me my whole life. And she said, bring it on, naively. 4 days later, she was destroyed. And she said, I'll never believe another word that comes out of your mouth the rest of your life. I thought, all right. I didn't go to therapy to fix her. I didn't go to therapy to fix my marriage. I'd already blown that up. And I came to the realization, if I can't even heal myself, why would I have the audacity to think I could heal anybody else. I went there to see if there was a way to change. And Scott, my therapist who became my friend, he helped me. And we worked hard. And he'd check in on me over the years. And slowly, incrementally, I had to deal with issues of fear. I found that fear was the deepest core of my being that I knew of. And that I had lived my life trying to protect myself. I found out eventually that there was something actually deeper than that. Deeper than the fear and deeper than the shame. And that was that I was made in the image and likeness of God. That means that I, by nature, am pure of heart. That that's the truth of my being. And that I, by nature, the truth of my being is that I have self-control. When you think you're a piece of crap, you got nothing from the inside to live out from. And so you're constantly trying to win the affection and approval because that's your life-sustaining stuff. Worked at it. Scott, he had a son. He has a son. And his son was in his early 20s and was really struggling with addiction. And one night, Scott, at his Bible study group, says, you know, I would lay down my life for my son if it would just free him from this. Well, that night he goes home, and his son lived with his parents at that time, in and out, trying to do rehab, trying to get it right. And Scott didn't know, but his son had earlier, either the day before or that morning, had bought a gun on the streets, and probably to take his own life. I mean, he loves his father and he loves his mother. And Scott comes home, and there's a woman who shows up at the house, and there was a restraining order against her because she was a conduit for the meth. And Scott goes out to talk to both of them, and the conversation gets heated, and finally Scott just looks at his son and goes, "Son, I can't make decisions for you. I just can't. And if you choose to go with her, you choose to go with her. I'm not going to make those decisions for you. But she needs to get off the premises because she's in violation of the restraining order." And his son indicates that he's going to go with her. Scott turns around, walks into the house, out of habit, locks the door behind him, not realizing his son had followed him because he's barefoot and he wanted to grab his shoes to go with him. And when he finds the door locked, he has a fit of rage. He takes the gun out of his waistband and uses the butt of the gun to break the window on the door to let himself in to get his shoes. And the concussion is so hard he doesn't realize that it goes off. And he shot his father right through the heart and killed him. And I get the call. Scott has been shot and killed by his own son. This world is full of brokenness. It's full of hurt. It's full of losses. I have a friend who's a master violin maker. His name's Martin Schlesky. He's in Germany. And I met him because of The Shack. I didn't write The Shack to become a published author. I didn't. I wrote it as a Christmas present for my kids. And I did it the year after my 11 years. I finally felt whole enough or healthy enough to do something that Kim had been asking me for about 4 years. Would you just write something as a gift for our kids that puts in one place how you think? Because you think outside the box. And for Christmas, the year I turned 50 years old, I wrote a story for my kids on the way to one of my 3 jobs, because it was 40 minutes each way on the train, the metro system in Portland. And I got it done and got a little money at Christmas and went down to Office Depot and made 15 copies. And those 15 copies did everything that I ever wanted that book to do. By the time I wrote it, the things that mattered to me were in place. Identity, worth, value, significance, security, meaning, purpose, destiny, community, love. And I wrote it as a gift to my kids. The extras I gave to my friends, and my friends started giving it to their friends, and it started this crazy chain reaction. I didn't even think, it didn't even cross my mind to be a published author. And it took me 2 years to say anything but, yeah, I'm an accidental author. But I'm an author. But it took me a while to see that that was actually true. My friend Martin Schlesky makes violins. He lives in a house that used to be owned by the sisters of Teresa Avila. In fact, Teresa Avila lived there. It's the only town in Germany not bombed by the Allies. And it was right at the cusp of when the armistice was going to happen that the Allied bombers were sent to bomb that city. And the top German official in the army for the Germans knew that they had lost the war. And he was contrary to the demands made by his hierarchy. He put white flags on all the roofs. And the head of the bombing contingent, the guy who was in charge, against orders, didn't bomb. And later, years later, they met. But as a result, it's the only city in Germany that still has these buildings that go back into the centuries. And Martin lives in one of them. And he makes these unbelievably beautiful, looked-for violins. And he wrote a book in German called Der Klang. And I was in Florida, and I was talking to a friend of mine named Carolina. And Carolina works in publishing in Germany. And my book had become this big deal in Germany. And in fact, it was the only book that had, in decades, that was carried by both secular and religious stores. And because they didn't do that. And so she became my friend, and we were talking about something, and she said, what are you thinking about right now? And I said, I'm kind of mad at the idea that God has a wonderful plan for your life. Right? God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. If any of you come from my sort of evangelical religious background that was part of the 4 spiritual laws, which I dubbed the 4 spiritual lies, my friend who's a theologian dubbed them the 4 spiritual flaws. So, but the first one is, it sounds good, but God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. But I was bugged by it because it seemed that God's love was contingent upon this plan. And I had to figure out what that was. And I've had enough experience of losses that people well-intentioned will come up after a loss and they will say things like, well, this has got to be part of God's plan. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Children being trafficked, that's part of God's plan. How about if some things are just wrong? And how about that God has such great respect for humanity that God will submit to their choices and still work redemption inside of that? Kevin gave me this, who's been our MC, and I hope you don't mind, Kevin. But his family has had a recent loss, a 4-year-old and an uncle. And he wrote something very, very beautiful. And he didn't give it to me to read tonight. But when that kind of thing happens, I always think there's a reason, and there's a purpose, and there's a kindness to this. And you'll resonate, because this is respecting loss. It's called The Silence Has Come, and Kevin wrote this. The sirens have faded. The cards are all opened. The condolences are done. The silence has come. We cling to each other. We wonder how to go on. We look for that answer. Why have you gone? We hear your laughter at night. We see your smile at dawn's first light. We look for you around every bend. We have hearts that won't mend. In the silence, we need you. In the silence, we feel you. In the silence, we know you. In the silence, we hear, I love you. And this is all framed inside a cross. Martin wrote his book, and I was talking to Carolina about this, and I'm saying, I don't like this. What I didn't know is that Carolina had a very good friend, a young man in Germany who was a stuntman. And shortly before we ended up in this conversation in Florida, he had done a stunt in Munich, and he'd done it hundreds of times, and he would be catapulted and he would be somersaulting over a number of highly fast-moving vehicles. And the last one of the vehicles was a truck that his father would drive. And he would go all over these fast-moving vehicles. And this particular event was being broadcast around the world. And some of his friends came to him and said, because he's a follower of Jesus, they said, look at the audience you're going to have. You need to think about what you're going to say when they interview you afterwards. And so he was a little bit distracted trying to think about what he would say. And when he did his stunt, he miscalculated, and his father hit him. And he was an instant quadriplegic. And people would say to his mother, again, my people, religious people, and they would say, look at the plan of God that is going to give your son an even bigger voice. And it broke the mother's heart and faith. And she walked away. If this is the kind of God who makes this kind of plan, count me out. That's in the background, and Carolina didn't even tell me. And she took our conversation back to the mom and gave the mom the shack. And the shack pulled her out of that loss. And then for my birthday, that next May, which happened to be Mother's Day that year, she sent me a little note translating a section of Martin Schlesky's book because it resonated with her about what I'd said. What do you do about loss? What do you do in the midst of loss? How do you find your way? And she says, Martin writes about the violin makers. And there was a time in the old days when the violin makers would go up to where rivers connected. And there's enough logging around here that was true. That's the way they did it way up north where Debbie and I graduated from high school in Terrace, But they would come to the places where logs would bang into each other. Because the lumberjacks would be cutting the trees down way up in the mountains. They'd dump them in the rivers and let the rivers do the work of carrying them down to where they could then take them out. But at these junctures where the logs hit each other, all the violin makers would gather because they were listening for what they called the singer trunks. There were certain logs that grew way up in the mountains that when they hit another log at those junctures, it would make a tone. And these were called the singers. And they're the ones that the violin makers would harvest. They would buy them from the logging companies. And then they would take these and put them into drying areas, and for years they would sit there until they were ready then out of which to craft the body of a violin. The singers. And Martin writes how uniquely these singers come into being. And he said the thing about these singers is that we have discovered that every fiber in those singers are affected by what they experience in these trees. And now Martin goes up for a few months up into the mountains using a tuning fork and banging on trees looking for the singers. But he said, we now know that every experience that that tree experiences, I mean, as subtle as the wind shifting and the sun hitting it different when another tree goes down next to it, and the roots having to go deeper because of the shift of the wind, every event that that tree experiences changes the fiber inside that tree and begins to create the ability for a sound. And he said it'll cause the tree to twist a certain way and to turn because it experiences difficulty and hardship. And that experience changes the molecular structure of that tree, and they become a singer because of the hardships that they've experienced. And he says, we then take these singers into our violin shops and we let them dry, and when the timing is right, we then use a planer to begin to work the body out. But here's the thing. You could come with mathematical precision and you could diagram what a violin is supposed to look like. Mathematically, you could have a great plan and be an engineer and figure out this is how it's supposed to look and this is how it's supposed to sound. And you could reduplicate that over and over and over. And he says there's a problem because creating a violin is not a work of engineering. It's a work of art. And in the process, when you start using the planer, the violin maker has to recognize where this tree has bent and where this tree has turned in relationship to the experiences and the hardships that it has experienced. And if you cut across that because it doesn't match your design, you will destroy the sound. So he said the violin maker, it's really about the artist submitting to the wood, not the wood submitting to the artist. And he uses that as an illustration about how God works in our lives. It's not that the hardships that you've experienced, that I experienced, just magically disappear, but they get redeemed. That is, out of the brokenness of our lives, there is the work of the artist who slowly begins to create a absolutely beautiful sound that incorporates those losses without justifying any of them. Sexual abuse is always wrong. Adultery is always wrong. There's no way to justify it. The hurtful things that happen in this world, the loss of a 4-year-old, the loss of a 5-year-old, the loss of an 18-year-old, the trafficking of women, what we've done to one another, what's happening in the exposure in Kamloops, all this kind of stuff, it's wrong. But it's not about a God who sat back and decided it was part of some great plan. It's about an artist who submits to the choices that we make because of the damage that we have had occur in our lives. The goal is what? The goal is for that wood to express its sound. And this is the beauty of what happens in our lives. When we begin to do the work, there is divine love. There is the presence of God in our lives that begins to redeem the losses, not to cause them to disappear. There is this geneticist that was giving a speech in Oxford, and he was asked, would it be possible in the future to clone Beethoven? And he said, yes and no. And he says, here's why. You could extract from Beethoven's coffin a DNA sample, and from that sample, you could create a perfect twin that looks exactly, acts exactly like Beethoven. And you could teach him to play music in a fairly high level. But here's why no. You see, Beethoven's father, who was his tutor, was a violent alcoholic. And Beethoven, who loved his mother, she died when he was a teenager. And it left Beethoven, because his father was such an alcoholic, to care for his two brothers. And then Beethoven's love of his life died. And Beethoven dealt with all sorts of losses. He lived in poverty. He struggled with debt. And ultimately, he turned to alcohol, like his dad. And then as he emerged from that, and just as his music began to get some attention, he began to lose his hearing. And out of that tumultuous life, Beethoven writes the pounding symphonies that we call Beethoven's best, symphonies 3 through 8. And those symphonies are an expression of his losses and his loves and his harm and his hurt and his redemption. And it comes blasting out. And the clone could never do that. Even master musicians who are better musicians than Beethoven cannot redo Beethoven's work. There is a sound that you make that the world needs, that can only emerge when you do the work. When you begin to allow the truth of who you are to emerge. We don't need you to be somebody else. We need you to be an authentic expression of the uniqueness of who you are. What if God could take the 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fish of my life, and in the breaking of them, care for others, and then pick up all the fragments in which nothing is lost? That would change everything. And that's what I write about. That's why we live in a world that is broken, and yet there is hope. That's why joy is a constant companion. We just don't stay present enough to find out. We're all in a journey to learn how to live inside the grace of one day, but it requires us to be truth tellers. It requires us to take the risk of trust. And that's scary for most of us, I think. And it's hard work. But there's hope in that. Hope not just for me and for you. Hope for humanity. And I'm an optimist about the world, because I'm optimistic about the presence of God in the midst of our brokenness. This is not a God who runs from our losses, but climbs into them. That's the whole story of Jesus. That it climbs into our darkness, our brutality, and begins to redeem it. Suffering, loss, joy, hope, redemption. I'm so grateful to be with you. It's such an honor. Thank you. I hope that was okay, Kevin, that I did that.
Thank you. That hasn't been widely shared, but I wrote that for... Yes. Well, it's now a great pleasure to introduce Jeremy Wilson and Leanne Hammond, who will make the presentation from the Emily Dahl Foundation for the scholarship.
Should I stay here or go down? Yep. Okay.
From Ted and
Okay. Hi, I'm Leanne Hammond, and I don't think I can follow that.
You don't have to. You need your sound.
I just wanted to say thank you all for coming out tonight. I think when I met Sherman, and he talks about his beautiful daughter, Emily, I see a man on a journey to find out about himself, about what his daughter was feeling and capable of, and the people in his life that he loves. And I feel honored that our community foundation was chosen to help share that search and those new realizations and all of the different things that Sherman and his family and his friends are going through, to find the positive in all of that. So a community foundation is for the whole community, and the Emily Dahl Foundation exists within our community foundation. And quite a few of you, I know, have donated. And I'm always amazed by all the different ideas that come up, and how they all overlap and blend together. Some working with working with various people who are going through grief and who are looking for strategies for dealing with various things. And part of it is about hope and the future. And this part, when Sherman said he wanted to start through the Emily Dahl Foundation a scholarship for $5,000 to help a student go on and make their mark in the world and go on to post-secondary education. I was absolutely blown away. I thought, wow, that's just so amazing. And I think all of us tried to talk him out of one $5,000 scholarship. Well, you could give it to 5 kids, you could give $1,000 to each, or you could give it to 2 for $2,500. But you stick to your guns. No, he wanted to make a difference in one life. And I think it was the right choice. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague here to maybe talk a little bit about Sky Volleyball and our winner for this year, who he knows more than I do. So,
thank you for that. My name is Jeremy Wilson, current president of Sky Volleyball Club. Thanks to Sherman and the Emily Dahl Foundation for the invite to this special event tonight. A little bit about Sky Volleyball Club. The club actually was formed way back in 1975 as the Vernon Volleyball Club, and it was rebranded several years ago to the Sky Volleyball Club, which was an exciting progression within the club itself. The outgoing president, Troy Lawrenson, who was a good friend of Sherman's, and was actually a coach of Emily for a period of time within the club, was part of that. And there's a big message within Sky. There's a lot of connotations that you can take from that name itself or that word itself. But the club itself is a non-profit society that offers youth volleyball activities within the greater Vernon area. And we're very proud to have upwards of 50 volunteer coaches, a dozen volunteer board members, and this year upwards of 400 youth athletes playing volleyball within the greater Vernon area. So we're excited about that. We've had a number of kids come through the program over the years, Emily being one of them. And when Sherman approached Troy initially about the scholarship, I mean, as Leanne mentioned, I mean, it was just a big thrill for us to be a part of that, and very appreciative of the gesture that he brought us into the fold with. So thanks for that. I wanted to just tie in with the flame burning here. I feel like there's a bit of a torch that's going to be burned tonight for the first time with this scholarship and the award, and there's nobody better to actually carry that torch into the future than ESO. ESO has been with the organization for a number of years as a player, and she definitely embodies everything that the Emily Dahl Foundation is about, everything that Sky Volleyball Club has been about, and we're very thankful for her to be a part of the club, and we're excited to see where she progresses in the years to come. So thank you very much, ESO, for that, and congratulations on the award. Thank you.
So ESO, if you could just come up, please. We would like to present you with, first off, this is a carving that was done by Ted, who was the fellow who was speaking there, the friend of Sherman's. And so it's a beautiful remembrance for you of what can be accomplished. And then we'd like to present you with your $5,000 towards your post-secondary education. And I want to say, as a parent here, you get to change your mind about what you want to do anytime in the process by saying at this point that you want to become a teacher and that you want to teach in a bilingual school. That's who you are and that's what you want right now at this very time. As you progress, you will discover, excuse me, all sorts of different possibilities you didn't even know exist. And so if you change your path at any point, we don't take the money back. It's all good. It's all good. Yeah. So if you do that, fantastic. If you do something else, fantastic.
That's awesome.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you and congratulations. And I don't know if we still have Ted here. We have a few more minutes, and we would entertain any questions the audience might have.
I've
And
got
we'll
a couple questions.
Just have a audience. But we have a few more minutes, and we promise we'll get to the wine and cheese and all those good things as well yet tonight.
I got to tell you that. Say, 1, 2. He's working on it.
Yeah, we can get Ted
Okay.
back on stage.
I think they're working on 2 things. I got to tell you that in the U.S., I tell them that Canadians don't do Q&A, right? Because we don't have all the answers. I tell them if I was an American, I'd probably do Q&A. But I say we do questions and responses. So just to put that in your pocket somewhere.
Ted, you're back.
I'm back. I am still trying to recover from the great speech that Paul gave, the depth, the solid understanding, and the points that I could well think of also what is out there. So, Paul, I am still recovering, and I'm honored to have been able to sit here and listen to you.
And Ted, I feel the same way. I'm so honored to even meet you. And I feel like the wisdom that you have, as one of the elders, and how connected you are to the land. I think that's just full of the kindness of God. I'm so appreciative of the things that you shared as well.
I was interested in everything you said, but you were talking about the wood. And I just wanted to tell you that so many people ask me when they see me with a piece of wood, what are you going to make with it? And my question is always, until the wood speaks to me and tells me, I don't know. And I think it was a beautiful comparison that you made with the violin player. And it was just great. And Sherman, I think tonight you found one of the nicest speakers I have ever heard, and I have heard many.
Thank you.
Wow.
Does anybody have a question for any of the panelists?
Yeah, we certainly encourage questions. I mean, you've got these 2 wonderful gentlemen, and while you guys are thinking of a question, Ted, can you tell that story of your theory of how all the good stuff ended up in Canada?
About the what?
How all the good stuff ended up in Canada?
How they divided the country.
Well, I thought it was a common story, and if Paul is going to write a book about it when I'm done, for sure 10% of the taking, Paul. The story has it that when the world was built and all the countries had borders around it, there was still much beautiful stuff left over, and it had to be put somewhere. And it was put down in one place, all the beautiful things. And then a border was built around it. And in the middle of this border, it was named Canada. And that's how this country came to be.
We've also,
beautiful.
that's a good one. Ted and I have talked a couple times. Ted's done a lot of work with youth. And it was a question I was going to ask earlier on Ted's views, number one, on youth, and also, you know, what would you tell the youth of today, Ted? And Ted and I have our own little dream of putting together a little retreat in Saskatchewan, up in northern Saskatchewan, and Ted will tell you why.
Well, you're right. I used to donate 2 weeks in August to disabled children, and that was through the Lions Club, of which I was a member, and it spread throughout all of Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And the joy and the excitement that I saw during those 2 weeks, the true spirit of children who are still children, it's no, like I said before, no money can buy. And I was just saying today to somebody that when you have 20 children in the middle of the boreal forest with rabbits running all over and squirrels and chipmunks, and you go to these children and first of all, you tell them that if they want to catch a rabbit, they must get some salt, sprinkle it on the rabbit's tail, and then the rabbit can't move anymore. Well, the result is that not one single cabin had salt shakers left in the cabin. And the other thing is the imagination of these children, how to catch these animals, because I offered $10 a rabbit, $50 a squirrel, and $100 for a chipmunk. And I knew I was safe on that score anyway. And the most beautiful thing, why, I don't know, but a little 7-year-old one came to my door. And while all the other children had found dip nets and ropes and brooms and to catch these animals, they could not kill them, of course. But this knock came on the door. And as I opened it, this little voice from about 2 feet below me looked up and said, "Mister, do you have a gun I can use?" And, you know, children are beautiful. But those 2 weeks of happiness and of joy and of sincerity, the 2 weeks of connecting what we really find and where we can find ourselves within the forest of this great nation. I like to believe the sooner we introduce the young people to that side of life rather than man-made side of life, I think society will be off better.
That's beautiful. You know, one of my grandchildren, Scarlett, who is like 5 years old, she announced, "Well, when I grow up, I'm going to be an astronaut or a garbage truck driver."
Yeah.
So do we have any questions from anybody have any questions for Ted or Paul?
So Ted, what was the first thing that you made? Did you do any woodwork before you were blind? Probably not, right?
No.
So what was your thought in terms of the first thing that you decided to carve? Why?
From the minute I lost my eyesight, my life, my attitude, my behavior changed. I really don't know why, but it changed. And it made me perhaps more determined to succeed without eyesight, simply because the rest of society said it couldn't be done. And I remember at the Canadian Institute for the Blind, when the board members said, so what do you want to do with your life? And I said, I like to be an outfitter. And they came back, said, that's impossible. No blind outfitter or no blind person ever became an outfitter. And my question to them was, nobody drove a Ford before Henry Ford built one. And that was in the outfitting industry, that was in the, with becoming an outboard mechanic. I used to water ski, and the first question people always had, Ted, how do you know where the boat is? I may lost my eyesight, but my hearing was very good. And I says, as long as I can hear the motor, I know where the boat is. And when you can't hear the motor, it really doesn't matter whether you can see or not. You're not going to stay on those skis. So things came gradually. And I liked your speech, Paul, in this gradual, there is no time, because we are outside man-made law. It is only man-made where we have the seconds, the minutes, the hours, the weeks, the months. Nature has an entirely different system. And so for me, as a young man of 22 years old, I had also many, many hurdles to overcome. But my wife isn't here tonight. But without my wife, without that happening, and she married me after I lost my eyesight, and that itself in the 60s was quite a task, because as a blind person, there were no jobs. Blind people were not recognized as being able to do anything. I like to think I broke some of those barriers, and they were not easy. As you well know, I listened to you, and nothing comes easy. But gradually it grows, and you overcome one hurdle, and you know there's going to be another one, but you're more prepared for the second and even more for the third. And so it's a gradual, at least with me, it was a gradual thing. And I just wanted to do what I wanted to do, and not necessarily being told by everybody what I had to do. And so that sort of, I also built the first fully wheelchair accessible fishing camp in Saskatchewan. And it was not really for the people in wheelchair. It was to prove to myself the power we have inside of us if we really wanted to do something. So I don't like to hang around people who are negative. I seek people who are positive. I seek people who see happiness, because they bring it without them inside themselves. And so here I am, 83 years old. I've had a super wonderful life. I have a son and daughter-in-law in Chilliwack, two great grandchildren, a daughter and a husband here in Flin Flon, and I am the happiest person in this world, but you have to work at it. And that's what I heard from you, Paul, tonight.
Yeah. Thank you. And by the way, Kim and I are the best we've ever been. Just so you know. And we have 6 children, and we are about to have our 14th grandchild. I'm a blessed man. What can I say?
Yeah. Well, that's and that is why when Sherman told me about you coming, believe you me, I would love to be in your midst tonight. However, we all know that was impossible. I have to go with my wife to Winnipeg for little medical reasons. However, restrictions are being eased off, and I really hope that somewhere on the highway of life, we will meet person to person.
It's inevitable.
Okay.
And it's wonderful if we had the technology that we could meet on the superhighway at least.
Oh, amazing.
Thank you, Ted. And I know that you still carve with diamond willow, because Sherman showed me one of your pieces, and it was my dad's favorite wood, and it's spectacular because diamond willow grows in the sloughs in Saskatchewan. And if you find the right piece, a piece of sand gets into the willow, and it grows into a diamond around it. And when you pull that wood out, you get this beautiful diamond shape. So out of that irritant, something beautiful comes. And this was a beautiful night, and there Sherman's got, that's a piece of diamond willow. And my dad's not with us, but I still have his walking stick, and I look at it every day, and it reminds me that sometimes we have irritants, but they can become something beautiful.
Come on.
Thank you, Paul, and Sherman, and Ted, and Lisa's going to conclude our presentation here.
Oops, I forgot I had my mask on. Yes, Sherman handed this to me. It's not for me. Oh. Sherman strategically placed a bunch of Ted's works around the house and waited to see if any resonated with Paul. And Paul saw this one and said, "Oh my goodness, that is gorgeous." Paul didn't have any idea why it was put there, but that is why. So,
oh my gosh, thank you.
Yeah, from the Emily Dahl Foundation, that is a thank you for this beautiful evening. And I think that's very appropriate, the story about the diamond willow.
It's a photograph, and it sits in this beautiful piece of diamond willow.
And as a counselor,
Thank you, Ted.
I would agree with you. And I loved, you said, what's my favorite book? Every one of them I can use with my clients because so much trauma, but so much beauty too. And so I think that's a very fitting wood.
Thank you, darling.
Yeah, thank you. So Godspeed on all your journeys. And for everyone, a good trip and safe trip home.
Thank you.
All right, guys.
Just a reminder, we do have some food and beverages here. The washrooms are, just watch your step going down. It's we've got some lights there. It's not quite dark yet.
Please, everybody, join us because we've got lots of food and we'd like to.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah. You make sure you take a Shack book, and if you'd like Paul to sign it, just come up to the stage.
Or I'll be around.
All right, we'll be around.
Thank you again.
Thank you. This is fantastic. I'm going to leave it right here for now.